The harsh morning sun beat down on Daphne Calloway's bruised hands as she scrubbed the wooden porch for the third time that day. Knowing full well that Mrs. Hargrove would find fault with her work, no matter how spotless it was. At 22, Daphne had spent the last 8 years of her life as little more than a servant in what was supposed to be her own home, ever since her father had died and left her in the care of his second wife and her 2 daughters. Daphne. The shrill voice of her stepmother pierced the hot Texas air. "You've missed a spot again. Do you think I'm blind? Perhaps another day without supper will help you learn to pay attention." Daphne bit her tongue until she tasted blood. It was 1878 in Taylor, Texas, and opportunities for a woman alone were scarce. Her father had been a respected shopkeeper, but his will had mysteriously disappeared after his death, leaving Daphne at the mercy of Martha Hargrove, a woman who had quickly revealed her true nature once Daphne's father was in the ground. "Yes, Mrs. Hargrove," Daphne murmured, dunking her raw hands back into the bucket of soapy water. She refused to call the woman mother, a small rebellion that earned her frequent slaps and missed meals, but one she clung to nonetheless. From sunrise until well past sunset, Daphne cooked, cleaned, mended, and served, while her stepsisters Beatrice and Constance lived like fine ladies on what remained of her father's money. What hurt most was that the house, the very house she was forced to maintain, had belonged to Daphne's mother, passed down through her family for generations. Now it might as well have been a prison. "When you finish there, the kitchen needs scrubbing, and then you'll help Beatrice prepare for the town dance," Mrs. Hargrove continued, fanning herself in the shade. "She'll need her blue dress pressed perfectly." Daphne nodded, keeping her eyes downcast to hide the spark of resentment. The blue dress had been made from fabric that was meant for Daphne, a birthday gift from her father just before he died. But like everything else that should have been hers, it had been taken away. As the afternoon wore on, Daphne worked mechanically, her mind drifting to dreams of escape. She tried once, 2 years ago, but had nowhere to go. The sheriff had returned her to the Hargroves, who had spun a tale about their troubled ward with wild tendencies. Since then, her stepmother had kept her on an even tighter leash, rarely allowing her to venture into town unless accompanied by a family member. The sound of horses approaching drew Daphne's attention. Through the kitchen window, she spotted 3 riders coming up the road toward their house. Visitors were uncommon, especially on a Thursday afternoon. Mrs. Hargrove hurried to the door, smoothing her dress and pinching her cheeks for color. "Daphne, fetch some refreshments quickly, and stay in the kitchen unless called." Daphne gathered a tray with the good glasses and the last of the lemonade, listening as her stepmother greeted the visitors with a sugary voice that bore no resemblance to the one she used with Daphne. "Mr. Mitchell, what a delightful surprise! And you've brought guests, Mrs. Hargrove," a deep voice responded, lacking the enthusiasm of her greeting. "This is my brother Lucas, visiting from San Antonio, and our friend Adam Morrison, who's just bought the old Fletcher Ranch." Daphne nearly dropped the tray. The Fletcher Ranch had been vacant for years after old Mr. Fletcher died. It was a beautiful property about 5 miles outside of town. "Pleased to meet you both," Mrs. Hargrove purred. "Won't you come in for some refreshments? My daughters would be thrilled to make your acquaintance." "Much obliged, madam, but we're just passing through on business. Adam here needs to hire some help for the ranch. Thought you might know of anyone looking for work." Daphne's heart raced as she listened from behind the kitchen door. A job at her ranch would mean freedom, escape from this house of misery. "Well, good help is so hard to find these days," Mrs. Hargrove replied, "but I'll certainly keep my ears open. My Beatrice and Constance are much too delicate for ranch work, of course." Of course, Mr. Mitchell agreed, though Daphne thought she detected a note of sarcasm in his voice. We're not looking for fine ladies, madam, just honest workers. There was a pause, then the new voice, presumably Adam Morrison, spoke for the first time. We'll be in town for the next few days if anyone comes to mind. The place needs a lot of work to get it running again. His voice was different from the others, deeper, with a slight accent Daphne couldn't place. It had a measured quality, as though each word was chosen carefully. Unable to contain her curiosity, Daphne pushed the door open slightly, peering through the crack. She could see the back of her stepmother's head, and beyond her, the three men still mounted on their horses. The Mitchell brothers she recognized from town, sandy-haired men with friendly faces. But the third man caught her attention immediately. Adam Morrison sat tall in his saddle, his broad shoulders straight beneath a worn leather vest. He had dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, and a face that looked as though it had been carved from stone, all angles and planes, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the dandies who courted her stepsisters, but there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that made it difficult to look away. As if sensing her gaze, his eyes suddenly shifted to the crack in the door, meeting Daphne's directly. They were a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, and for a moment she stood frozen, caught in that unexpected connection. Mrs. Hargrove noticed his diverted attention and turned, spotting Daphne. "There you are. Bring the refreshments at once." Gathering her courage, Daphne pushed the door open fully and stepped onto the porch, carefully balancing the tray. She kept her eyes lowered as she approached, conscious of her faded dress and the wisps of auburn hair escaping from her braid. "Gentlemen, this is my husband's daughter, Daphne, Mrs. Hargrove introduced her with obvious reluctance. "Daphne, offer the gentlemen some lemonade before they continue their journey." Daphne moved forward, extending the tray first to Mr. Mitchell, then his brother. When she reached Adam Morrison, she risked glancing up again and found him studying her intently. His eyes moved over her face, down to her work-roughened hands, then back to meet her gaze. Something in his expression shifted, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a tightening around his mouth. "Thank you, miss," he said quietly, taking a glass. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, and Daphne felt a jolt of awareness at the contact. Up close, she could see that what she'd taken for coldness in his features was actually a kind of watchfulness, the careful observation of a man accustomed to assessing his surroundings. "You're welcome, sir," she replied, her voice little more than a whisper. "Daphne, you may return to your duties now," Mrs. Hargrove ordered sharply. But before Daphne could retreat, Adam spoke again. "Actually, Mrs. Hargrove, you mentioned everyone in your household. Does Miss Calloway work for you?" The question hung in the air. Daphne held her breath, watching her stepmother's back stiffen. "Daphne is my stepdaughter, as I mentioned," Mrs. Hargrove said with forced lightness. "She helps with the household, naturally. All young ladies should learn domestic skills." Adam's gaze never left Daphne's face. "And is she spoken for?" Mrs. Hargrove gave a brittle laugh. "Heavens, no. Daphne has little interest in social matters. She prefers work to companionship, don't you, dear?" Daphne said nothing, knowing any response would earn her punishment later. "I see," Adam said, though his tone suggested he saw quite clearly what was happening. "Well, as I mentioned, I'm looking for workers for my ranch. All kinds of positions need filling." "A ranch is no place for a young lady," Mrs. Hargrove said firmly. "My mother and sisters might disagree," Adam replied. "They run our family ranch in Colorado with more skill than most men I know." He drained his lemonade and handed the glass back to Daphne. This time, There was no mistaking the deliberate brush of his fingers against hers. "Thank you for the refreshment, Miss Calloway." The use of her proper name, not girl or you, as most visitors addressed her at her stepmother's prompting, sent a warm current through Daphne's chest. "We should be on our way," Mr. Mitchell announced. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mrs. Hargrove." As the men prepared to leave, Adam turned his horse but paused, looking directly at Daphne once more. "Miss Calloway, should you ever be interested in honest work with fair compensation, my offer stands. Good day to you." With a tip of his hat, he followed the Mitchell brothers down the drive, leaving Daphne staring after him with a mixture of confusion and something that felt dangerously like hope. Mrs. Hargrove's hand clamped painfully around Daphne's arm the moment the men were out of sight. "What game do you think you're playing, girl, making eyes at a stranger?" "I wasn't." The slap came swiftly, rocking Daphne's head to the side. "Don't lie to me. I saw how you looked at him. Let me make something perfectly clear. You belong here, working off the debt of your father's care for you. You'll not be running off to play housemaid for some rancher with wandering eyes." "My father left me this house," Daphne said, unable to stop herself. "I owe you nothing." Mrs. Hargrove's face contorted with rage. "Your father left no will, you ungrateful child. Everything belongs to me now." "Everything?" She dug her fingers deeper into Daphne's arm. "And if I ever catch you speaking to that man again, you'll regret it more than you can imagine. Do you understand me?" Daphne lowered her eyes. "Yes, Mrs. Hargrove. Now get back to work. And since you've clearly forgotten your place, you can sleep in the cellar tonight instead of your room. Perhaps the rats will remind you of your station." As her stepmother stormed back into the house, Daphne touched her stinging cheek, but the physical pain paled in comparison to the ache of renewed hopelessness in her chest. For one brief moment, when Adam Morrison had looked at her, she'd felt seen, truly seen for the first time in years. But such moments were dangerous. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. With a deep breath, she gathered the tray and glasses and returned to the kitchen, pushing thoughts of blue eyes and ranch work firmly from her mind. That night, as Daphne huddled on the damp cellar floor with only a thin blanket between her and the cold stone, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to work at the Fletcher Ranch. To have a real job with wages, not endless servitude. To be addressed as Miss Calloway every day. To be free. Sleep came fitfully, with dreams of wide open spaces and a tall figure watching her from horseback, his face in shadow beneath a worn leather hat. When dawn broke, Daphne was already awake, her body stiff from the hard floor. She made her way upstairs to start the morning fire and begin breakfast before the household stirred. Her routine was so ingrained she could perform it half asleep. Light the stove, mix biscuit dough, slice bacon, brew coffee. The familiar tasks required no thought, leaving her mind free to wander. 3 days passed in the usual manner, endless work, punctuated by Mrs. Hargrove's criticism and the occasional cruelty of her stepsisters. Daphne did her best to remain invisible, to give no cause for additional punishment, but she couldn't stop thinking about the Fletcher Ranch and Adam Morrison's unexpected offer. On the 4th day, an opportunity presented itself. Mrs. Hargrove announced at breakfast that she and the girls would be traveling to the neighboring town of Georgetown for a dress fitting. "We'll be gone overnight," she informed Daphne. "I expect the house to be spotless when we return tomorrow evening. And don't think I haven't noticed the state of the garden. Those weeds need tending." "Yes, Mrs. Hargrove," Daphne replied, keeping her eyes on the floor to hide the sudden spark of excitement. Once the carriage disappeared down the road, Daphne raced upstairs to her small room in the attic. From beneath a loose floorboard, She retrieved the few items she'd managed to save from her previous life. Her mother's silver hairbrush, a small portrait of her parents, and a pouch containing the 3 gold coins her father had given her for safekeeping shortly before his death. She changed into her one decent dress, faded blue cotton, patched but clean, and plaited her hair neatly. After a moment's hesitation, she added her mother's lace collar to the neckline of her dress. Looking in the cracked mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The woman staring back wasn't a servant but a lady, tired and thin, perhaps, but with a dignity that no amount of mistreatment could fully erase. The walk into town took nearly an hour. Daphne kept expecting to hear hoofbeats behind her, imagining Mrs. Hargrove had forgotten something and returned to find her gone. But the road remained empty, and gradually her steps grew more confident. Taylor was busy that morning, with farmers' wagons lining the main street and townspeople moving between shops. Daphne kept her head down, avoiding the curious glances of those who recognized her. Mrs. Hargrove rarely allowed her to come to town, and when she did, Daphne was usually laden with packages and walking 3 steps behind the family. The Mitchell brothers' store was at the far end of the street. Daphne hesitated outside, gathering her courage before pushing open the door. A bell jingled overhead, announcing her arrival. James Mitchell looked up from the counter where he was measuring fabric for a customer. His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Miss Calloway, this is unexpected." Daphne waited quietly while he finished with his customer. When they were alone, she approached the counter, hands clasped tightly before her. "Mr. Mitchell, I was wondering if you might tell me where to find Mr. Morrison, the one who bought the Fletcher Ranch." Understanding dawned in James Mitchell's kind eyes. "Adam's staying at the hotel while his house is being repaired, but he should be by shortly. He mentioned needing supplies this morning." As if summoned by the conversation, the bell above the door jingled again, and Adam Morrison himself walked in. He stopped short when he saw Daphne, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Calloway," he said, removing his hat. "I didn't expect to see you in town." Up close, in the clear light of the store, Daphne could see him better than she had at the house. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she'd seen. Today, his dark hair was damp as if recently washed, and he'd shaved the shadow of beard she'd noticed before. "Mr. Morrison," she acknowledged, suddenly uncertain. The confidence that had carried her into town seemed to evaporate under his direct gaze. James Mitchell cleared his throat. "I'll just check on something in the back," he said, tactfully disappearing through a curtained doorway. Left alone with Adam, Daphne struggled to find the right words. You mentioned you were looking for workers for your ranch." Adam studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I did. I'm a hard worker, Mr. Morrison. I can cook, clean, mend, anything you need done in a house, I can do it. And I'm willing to learn ranch work too." "I don't doubt your capabilities, Miss Calloway," he said carefully. "But I'm curious, does your stepmother know you're here?" Daphne lifted her chin. "Mrs. Hargrove is not my guardian, Mr. Morrison, though she'd have you believe otherwise. I'm 22 years old and legally entitled to make my own decisions." Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "And what decision have you made exactly?" "To accept your offer of employment if it still stands." Adam leaned against the counter, considering her. "The work is hard, the hours long, and the house currently in a state of considerable disrepair. It's no place for someone accustomed to town life." "Mr. Morrison," Daphne said quietly, "I rise before dawn and work until after midnight. I sleep in an attic when I'm fortunate, and in the cellar when I'm not. I've scrubbed floors until my hands bled and gone days without proper meals when my work was deemed inadequate." She held out her reddened, calloused hands as evidence. "I am not afraid of hard work or discomfort." Adam's expression darkened as he looked at her hands, then back to her face. "I see," he said simply. He straightened and put his hat back on. "In that case, Miss Calloway, the position is yours if you want it. $30 a month plus room and board. You'll have your own cabin once it's repaired. Until then, you can stay in the main house. I have a housekeeper coming from San Antonio next week, but she's elderly and will need help." Daphne's heart hammered in her chest. $30 a month was more money than she'd seen in years. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison, I accept. You need to collect your belongings." She patted the small satchel at her side. "I have everything I need right here." For the first time, a smile touched Adam's lips, just a brief upturn at one corner, but it transformed his face, softening the hard lines. "Traveling light, I approve." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "I have a few more errands to run in town. Can you be ready to leave in an hour?" "We can meet back here." Daphne nodded, relief flooding through her. "Yes, I'll be here." As Adam turned to call for James Mitchell, Daphne caught his sleeve. "Mr. Morrison," he looked back at her, one eyebrow raised. "When Mrs. Hargrove discovers I'm gone, she might come looking for me. She might claim I've stolen from her or that I'm not of sound mind." Daphne swallowed hard. "I need you to know that's not true." Adam's expression softened. "Miss Calloway, I've met your stepmother exactly once, and in those 5 minutes I learned everything I needed to know about her character." He placed his hand briefly over hers where it still clutched his sleeve. "You have nothing to fear from me. I judge people by their own actions, not by tales told about them." The simple declaration nearly brought tears to Daphne's eyes. She released his sleeve and stepped back. "Thank you." With a nod, Adam returned to his business, leaving Daphne to sit on a bench near the front of the store, her heart lighter than it had been in years. True to his word, Adam returned in an hour, accompanied by a loaded wagon. James Mitchell helped carry the last of the supplies out while Daphne waited nervously by the door. "Ready, Miss Calloway?" Adam asked, offering his hand to help her onto the wagon seat. Daphne hesitated, glancing back toward the direction of the Hargrove house. Was she really doing this? Leaving behind the only home she'd known, even if it had become a prison, for an uncertain future with a man who was virtually a stranger. But when she looked at Adam's outstretched hand, she knew there really was no choice at all. Staying meant a slow death of the spirit. Leaving offered at least the possibility of something better. She took his hand and climbed onto the seat beside him. "I'm ready, Mr. Morrison." As the wagon pulled away from town, Daphne didn't look back. For the first time in 8 years, she was moving forward toward a future she could barely imagine but was determined to embrace. The Fletcher Ranch was exactly as Daphne had heard, 5 miles outside of town, nestled against a backdrop of rolling hills and ancient oak trees. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of limestone and wood, with a wide veranda wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property. A barn, stables, a smokehouse, and what appeared to be small cabins. But Adam hadn't exaggerated about the state of disrepair. As they approached, Daphne could see missing roof shingles, broken windows, and a general air of neglect about the place. "Old man Fletcher died 3 years ago," Adam explained as he guided the wagon up the drive. "His son tried to keep the place going but lost it to gambling debts. It's been sitting empty for over a year now." He glanced at Daphne. "I know it doesn't look like much at the moment, but it has good bones. The land is fertile, the water supply reliable. It just needs work and people who care about it." There was something in his voice when he spoke of the ranch, a quiet passion that revealed more about Adam Morrison than anything else Daphne had observed so far. "Why this place?" she asked. You mentioned a family ranch in Colorado. Adam nodded. My father's ranch. My older brothers run it now with their families. It's a fine operation, but— He paused, seeming to search for the right words. There comes a time when a man needs to build something of his own, not just inherit what others have built. As they pulled up to the house, a tall, lanky man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He approached the wagon with a friendly wave. Brought back half the store, I see, the man called. He looked to be in his 40s with graying hair and a weathered face creased by smile lines. Miss Calloway, this is Henry Watkins, Adam introduced as he climbed down from the wagon. He's my foreman and the only other soul on this property at the moment. Henry, Miss Daphne Calloway, who's agreed to help get this place in order. Henry's eyes widened slightly as he took in Daphne's appearance, but he recovered quickly, offering a respectful nod. Pleasure to meet you, madam. We sure could use a woman's touch around here. Thank you, Mr. Watkins, Daphne replied, accepting Adam's assistance as she climbed down from the wagon. I'm happy to help however I can. Henry's been sleeping in the bunkhouse, Adam explained, but we've been taking meals in the main house kitchen. It's one of the few rooms that's fully functional. He led Daphne up the porch steps and through the front door into a spacious entryway. Despite the dust and cobwebs, Daphne could see that the house had once been impressive, with high ceilings, hardwood floors, and detailed woodwork around the doorways. The previous owners left most of the furniture, Adam continued, guiding her through the downstairs rooms. Much of it needs repair or replacing, but it's serviceable for now. The tour ended in the kitchen, a large, bright room at the back of the house with a massive stone fireplace, a pump sink, and a solid oak table in the center. This was the first room we cleaned properly, Adam said. Henry's no cook, and I manage basic meals, but nothing fancy. Daphne ran her hand along the kitchen table, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. The challenge before her was enormous, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt energized. This work had purpose, and more importantly, it was her choice. I can start right away, she said. If you'll show me to my room, I can leave my things and begin cleaning. Adam shook his head. You've had a long journey. Get settled first. The upstairs rooms are dusty but sound. I've been using the master bedroom at the end of the hall, and we've prepared the blue room for you, second door on the right. It has its own washroom attached. Her own room with a private washroom. Daphne could hardly imagine such luxury after years in an attic cubicle with a shared chamber pot. Tomorrow's soon enough to start work, Adam continued. For tonight, just rest and get your bearings. I'm not tired, Daphne insisted, and I'd prefer to be useful. Adam studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well, but only light duties today. You can help me prepare supper if you'd like, and perhaps make a list of what supplies we'll need for a proper household. For the next few hours, Daphne worked alongside Adam in comfortable silence, taking stock of the kitchen provisions and preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and cornbread. It felt strange to work in a kitchen without Mrs. Hargrove's constant criticism, to move at her own pace and use her own judgment. Even stranger was the way Adam treated her with a quiet respect, consulting her opinion on various matters as if they were partners rather than employer and employee. He seemed to genuinely value her input, from how to arrange the kitchen to what foodstuffs they should prioritize purchasing. By the time Henry joined them for the evening meal, Daphne had mentally mapped out a week's worth of cleaning and organizing tasks. The challenge before her was enormous, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose and more dangerously hope. As darkness fell, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, the glow of oil lamps casting warm shadows across the walls. Henry entertained them with stories of his travels across the Western Territories, while Adam listened more than he spoke, occasionally adding a dry comment that made them all laugh. It was the most pleasant evening Daphne could remember since her father's death. When she finally excused herself to retire for the night, exhaustion hit her all at once, not just the physical weariness of the day's journey, but the emotional toll of her decision to leave behind everything familiar, however painful it had been. Adam walked her to the foot of the stairs. "Sleep well, Miss Calloway. Tomorrow's a new beginning." In the blue room, Daphne found a spacious chamber with a four-poster bed, a dresser, washstand, and rocking chair near the window. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but the linens on the bed looked fresh. Someone, Adam or Henry, had placed a vase of wildflowers on the dresser, a touch of welcome that brought a lump to Daphne's throat. After washing with the pitcher and basin on the washstand, she changed into her nightgown and slipped between the clean sheets. The bed was softer than anything she'd slept on in years. As she drifted toward sleep, Daphne realized she hadn't once thought about Mrs. Hargrove or what would happen when her absence was discovered. Tomorrow, she told herself. She would worry about it tomorrow. But when morning came, bathing the blue room in golden light, Daphne woke with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. She dressed quickly in her work clothes, braided her hair, and made her way downstairs to find Adam already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. "Good morning, Miss Calloway," he greeted her. "Sleep well. Better than I have in years," Daphne admitted, moving to help with breakfast preparations. "Thank you for the room, it's lovely." "It will be once we get it properly cleaned and repaired," Adam said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "The whole house has potential." Over breakfast, they discussed the day's tasks. Adam and Henry would continue working on the barn roof, while Daphne would start tackling the kitchen and pantry. "Feel free to discard anything that's beyond saving," Adam told her. "We can replace what we need. The important thing is making the place livable again." With that, the men headed out to their work, leaving Daphne alone in the house. For a moment, she stood in the center of the kitchen, overwhelmed by the silence and solitude, not the fearful isolation of the Hargrove house, but a peaceful quiet that invited rather than imprisoned. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The day passed quickly. Daphne scrubbed, sorted, discarded, and organized with a vigor that surprised even herself. Without Mrs. Hargrove's constant interruptions and arbitrary demands, she accomplished more in a few hours than she would have in days at her old home. By mid-afternoon, the kitchen was transformed. The stone floor shone, the wooden surfaces gleamed with beeswax, and the pantry shelves were organized with the salvageable supplies neatly arranged. Daphne had started bread dough rising and put a pot of beans to soak for tomorrow's meals. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the approaching hoofbeats until a shadow fell across the kitchen doorway. Looking up, she found Adam leaning against the frame, watching her with an expression of surprised admiration. "You've accomplished miracles," he said, stepping into the room and turning slowly to take in the transformation. "I hardly recognize the place." Daphne straightened, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead. "It just needed attention. Most things do." Adam's eyes lingered on her face. "Indeed they do." He crossed to the pump sink and washed his hands, the muscles in his forearms flexing with the movement. "Henry and I have made good progress on the barn. We'll have it weather-tight before the week is out." "That's wonderful," Daphne said, turning to check on her bread dough. "I've been making a list of supplies we'll need for the house. When will you next go to town?" There was a slight pause before Adam answered. "I thought we might both go tomorrow. There are some items I'd like your opinion on, and you might want to purchase some personal necessities." Daphne's hands stilled on the dough. Return to town, where she might encounter someone who knew her, or worse, Mrs. Hargrove herself. The very thought made her stomach clench with anxiety. Adam seemed to read her thoughts. "We needn't stay long," he said quietly. "Just long enough to get what we need." Daphne nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. "Yes, of course. That would be fine." The evening passed much like the previous one, with a simple but satisfying meal and easy conversation. Henry complimented Daphne's freshly baked bread with such enthusiasm that she found herself blushing with pleasure. It had been so long since her efforts had been appreciated rather than criticized. Later, as she prepared for bed, Daphne found herself wondering about Adam Morrison. He was a puzzle, a man of few words who nonetheless managed to convey consideration in small, thoughtful gestures. He worked alongside his hired help without complaint, ate simple food with genuine appreciation, and seemed to notice everything without commenting on most of it. And then there was the way he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she wasn't aware, with a kind of thoughtful intensity that made her both uncomfortable and curiously warmed. The next morning dawned clear and mild. Daphne dressed in her blue dress again, the only one she owned that was suitable for town, and twisted her hair into a neat bun. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she was surprised to see a healthy flush in her cheeks and a brightness in her eyes that had been absent for years. 2 days of good food, restful sleep, and meaningful work had already begun to transform her appearance. The constant tension that had drawn her features tight had eased, giving her face a softer, more youthful look. Adam was waiting with the wagon when she came downstairs. He wore a clean shirt and had trimmed his beard, looking more the prosperous rancher than the working man she'd seen yesterday. "Ready for town, Miss Calloway?" he asked, helping her onto the wagon seat. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied honestly. As they drove, Adam briefed her on their errand: supplies for the house and barn, mail to collect, banking to attend to. "And I thought you might like to visit the dressmaker," he added. "You'll need more suitable clothing for ranch work." Daphne stiffened. "Mr. Morrison, I can't accept. It's not charity, Miss Calloway," he interrupted gently. "It's a necessary expense for a valued employee. I'd do the same for Henry if he needed new work clothes." Put that way, Daphne found it difficult to argue. Still, the idea of accepting such generosity made her uncomfortable. For so long, every gift from the Hargroves had come with strings attached: obligations, humiliations, servitude disguised as gratitude. "I can pay you back from my wages," she offered. Adam glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "If that would make you more comfortable, we can arrange it that way, but it's not necessary." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon the only sounds. Daphne gazed out at the landscape, so different from her usual view of the town's narrow streets. The open spaces of the ranch country filled her with a sense of freedom she'd almost forgotten was possible. "May I ask you something, Miss Calloway?" Adam said suddenly. Daphne turned to him. "Of course. How did you come to be in the Hargroves' home? You mentioned your father." Daphne's hands tightened in her lap. "My father was Jacob Calloway. He owned the general store in Taylor before Mr. Mitchell's family. When my mother died of fever when I was 12, he was devastated. 2 years later, he married Martha, thinking I needed a mother's influence." She paused, the familiar ache of loss tightening her throat. "He died of a heart ailment less than a year after the wedding. The doctor said it was his weak heart, but I always wondered if it was grief that truly killed him." Adam's expression was somber. "And you've been with the Hargroves since then?" "Yes. Initially, Mrs. Hargrove treated me well enough, at least when others were watching, But after my father's will mysteriously disappeared and the store was sold, she no longer saw the need to pretend. My status changed. From daughter to servant, Adam said quietly. Daphne nodded. I had nowhere else to go. No other family, no money of my own. Mrs. Hargrove made it clear that I should be grateful for the roof over my head, regardless of the conditions attached to it. Adam's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. No one should live in servitude in their own home. It wasn't really my home anymore, Daphne said softly. Not after she took over. They were approaching Taylor now, the church steeple visible in the distance. Daphne's anxiety returned, making her palms damp and her heart race, as if sensing her distress. Adam spoke again, his tone deliberately lighter. What do you think of the ranch so far? I know it's a far cry from town living. Grateful for the change of subject, Daphne considered the question. I think it has tremendous potential. The house is solidly built, just neglected. With care, it could be beautiful again. Adam smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his serious face. My thoughts exactly. The first time I saw it, I could picture what it must have been like in its prime and what it could be again with the right attention. There was such conviction in his voice that Daphne found herself smiling in response. You sound like a man with a vision, Mr. Morrison. I suppose I am. He guided the horses around a bend in the road. I've worked other men's land all my life, first my father's, then as a hired hand on ranches across 3 states. When I had saved enough to buy my own place, I knew exactly what I was looking for. And the Fletcher Ranch was it. The moment I saw it, he glanced at her. Does that sound foolish? To know something is right just by the feeling it gives you. Daphne thought about the immediate sense of peace she'd felt upon entering the ranch house, despite its dilapidated state. Not foolish at all, Mr. Morrison. I think some places speak to us in ways that go beyond practical considerations. Adam's eyes held hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper, a look of pleased surprise in their blue depths. Yes, he said quietly. That's it exactly. They reached the outskirts of town, and Daphne tensed, drawing her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Adam seemed to notice her discomfort but made no comment, simply guiding the wagon toward the main street. Their first stop was the general store, where Adam efficiently collected the supplies on their list while Daphne selected household necessities. James Mitchell greeted them warmly, showing no surprise at seeing them together, for which Daphne was grateful. Any news from around town? Adam asked casually as James tallied their purchases. The storekeeper glanced briefly at Daphne before answering. Nothing much, though Mrs. Hargrove and her daughters returned early from Georgetown yesterday afternoon, seemed in quite a state about something. Daphne's heart sank. So her absence had been discovered already. She busied herself examining a bolt of fabric, trying to appear unconcerned. Is that so? Adam replied, his tone neutral. Family troubles, perhaps. James nodded sagely. Perhaps. They were asking after Miss Calloway quite insistently. Daphne's fingers tightened on the fabric. Adam moved subtly closer to her, his presence reassuring. Well, town gossip aside, he said firmly, we have more errands to attend to. James, have these items delivered to the ranch, would you? We'll take the smaller parcels with us now. With a nod, James wrapped their immediate purchases while Adam settled the bill. As they prepared to leave, the storekeeper leaned across the counter. Sheriff Wilson was asking about you too, Miss Calloway, he said quietly. Just so you know. Daphne's blood ran cold. What did you tell him? Nothing much. Said I hadn't seen you recently, which was true at the time. James straightened up. But Taylor's a small town. People talk. Thank you for the warning, Adam said, placing a protective hand at Daphne's elbow. Good day, James. Outside, Daphne stood frozen on the boardwalk, panic rising in her chest. "They're looking for me. Mrs. Hargrove must have gone to the sheriff." Adam guided her toward the wagon, his voice low and steady. "Did you expect otherwise? You said yourself she'd claim you stole something or worse." "We should leave town immediately," Daphne urged. "If Sheriff Wilson finds me, Daphne." It was the first time Adam had used her given name, and the sound of it stopped her mid-sentence. "You've done nothing wrong. You're a grown woman who chose to take employment. That's not a crime." "You don't understand. Mrs. Hargrove has influence in this town. People listen to her. She'll twist the story until I sound like a thief or a madwoman." Adam's expression hardened. "Then we'll set the record straight. I won't have you looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life." Before Daphne could protest further, a familiar voice called out from across the street. "There she is. Daphne Calloway." Beatrice Hargrove, the elder of Daphne's stepsisters, was pointing directly at her, her shrill voice carrying across the street. Beside her stood Mrs. Hargrove, whose face contorted with a mixture of rage and triumph. "Sheriff, she's here," Beatrice continued to shout, drawing the attention of everyone on the street. Daphne instinctively stepped closer to Adam, who straightened to his full height, his expression impassive but alert. "Stay calm," he murmured to her. "I won't let them harm you." Mrs. Hargrove marched across the street, Beatrice trailing behind her. A moment later, Sheriff Wilson emerged from his office down the block, heading in their direction. "Daphne Calloway," Mrs. Hargrove hissed, stopping a few feet away. "You ungrateful, thieving wretch! How dare you run away after all we've done for you?" "I'm a grown woman, Mrs. Hargrove," Daphne replied, amazed at the steadiness of her own voice. "I've chosen to seek employment elsewhere." "Employment?" Mrs. Hargrove's laugh was brittle. "Is that what you're calling it? Running off with a man you barely know?" She turned her venomous gaze on Adam. "And you, sir? I wonder what the good people of Taylor would think if they knew you'd stolen away a young woman from her family home." Adam regarded her coolly. "Miss Calloway is employed as a housekeeper at my ranch, Mrs. Hargrove. Any suggestion otherwise is not only false but potentially slanderous." Sheriff Wilson arrived, looking uncomfortable with the public confrontation. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, with a drooping mustache and weary eyes. "What seems to be the problem here? This man has taken my stepdaughter against her will," Mrs. Hargrove declared, pointing an accusing finger at Adam. "And she's stolen valuable items from our home." "That's a lie," Daphne exclaimed, her composure finally breaking. "I took nothing but what was rightfully mine, my mother's hairbrush and my father's portrait." Sheriff Wilson held up his hands. "Let's all calm down. Miss Calloway, your stepmother has been quite concerned about your sudden disappearance." "Has she?" Daphne asked bitterly. "Or is she more concerned about losing her unpaid servant?" The sheriff's eyebrows rose at this, and he glanced between Daphne and Mrs. Hargrove. "Sheriff Wilson," Adam interjected calmly, "Miss Calloway is of legal age and has entered into employment at the Fletcher Ranch of her own free will. There is no law against a woman seeking honest work." "There is a law against theft," Mrs. Hargrove countered. "She took items of value from my home." "Items that belonged to my parents," Daphne insisted. "And even if they didn't, the value of my unpaid labor over 8 years would more than compensate for a hairbrush and a small portrait." A small crowd had gathered now, watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Daphne spotted several familiar faces, including the minister's wife and the blacksmith, both of whom had visited the Hargrove home and seen firsthand how Daphne was treated. Sheriff Wilson tugged at his mustache, clearly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion at my office." "There's nothing to discuss," Adam interrupted firmly. "Miss Calloway has made her choice. Unless you're formally charging her with a crime, Sheriff, we'll be on our way." Mrs. Hargrove's face flushed with anger. "She belongs with her family." "Family?" Daphne's voice rose with indignation. "You've treated me like a slave in my own home for 8 years. You worked me from dawn until midnight, fed me scraps, made me sleep in the cellar when I displeased you. What kind of family does that?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Hargrove blanched, her eyes darting around at the faces watching them. "Ridiculous exaggerations," she sputtered. "Daphne has always had a flair for the dramatic." "Is it an exaggeration, Martha?" A new voice joined the conversation as Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, stepped forward from the crowd. "I've seen the girl's hands, raw and bleeding from scrubbing. I've seen her eating in the kitchen while you and your daughters dined in the parlor. I've seen the way you speak to her not as a daughter, but as a servant. And I've seen her carrying loads that would strain a man's back," added Mr. Davis, the blacksmith, "while your Beatrice and Constance sat with parasols on the porch." Mrs. Hargrove's confidence faltered as more townspeople murmured agreement. She turned to the sheriff, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Robert, surely you can't allow this. The girl is confused, unstable. Her father's death affected her deeply." Sheriff Wilson looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Martha, if Miss Calloway is of age and wishes to seek employment, I have no legal grounds to interfere. But the stolen items were my mother's personal effects," Daphne interrupted. "And if you insist they're stolen, I'll gladly return them in exchange for 8 years of back wages." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Mrs. Hargrove's face contorted with rage, but she could see the tide of public opinion turning against her. "This isn't over," she hissed at Daphne. "You'll regret this betrayal." With that, she grabbed Beatrice's arm and swept away, her back rigid with fury. The crowd began to disperse, many casting sympathetic glances at Daphne as they returned to their business. Sheriff Wilson sighed heavily. "Well, that was unpleasant. You all right, Miss Calloway?" Daphne nodded, though her legs felt weak with the aftermath of confrontation. "Yes, thank you, Sheriff. And you're certain this arrangement is what you want?" he asked, glancing at Adam. "Mr. Morrison here is treating you properly." "More properly than I've been treated in years," Daphne assured him. "I have my own room, regular meals, and fair wages for my work." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Good, good. Well then, I consider this matter closed." He tipped his hat to them both. "Good day to you." As he walked away, Daphne sagged against the wagon, the tension draining from her body and leaving exhaustion in its wake. "You handled that admirably," Adam said quietly, standing close beside her. "Not many would have the courage to stand up to their tormentors so publicly." Daphne looked up at him, seeing respect in his eyes that warmed her more than any praise. "I had help," she said simply. "The truth needed only a voice. You provided that." He helped her onto the wagon seat. "Shall we continue our errands, or would you prefer to return to the ranch?" Daphne straightened her shoulders. "Let's continue. I'd rather not give Mrs. Hargrove the satisfaction of thinking she chased me away." Adam's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "As you wish." They completed their remaining errands, efficiently a visit to the dressmaker, where Daphne was measured for 2 everyday dresses and a Sunday best, a stop at the apothecary for medicines and toiletries, and finally, a brief call at the post office. By the time they headed back to the ranch, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the road. Daphne felt drained but oddly exhilarated. For the first time, she had stood her ground against Mrs. Hargrove and won. "Something amusing you?" Adam asked, noticing her small smile. "I was just thinking. I spent years afraid of that woman, believing I had no choice but to endure her treatment, and all it took to be free was the courage to walk away." She shook her head. "I wish I'd done it sooner." "It's not always that simple," Adam observed. Without somewhere to go, walking away can be the more frightening option. Daphne glanced at him. Is that why you offered me employment that day? You saw I had nowhere to go. Adam was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the road ahead. I saw someone trapped in circumstances not of their making, he finally said. And I recognized the look in your eyes, the same one I've seen in wild horses when they're first corralled, a mixture of defiance and resignation. He turned to meet her gaze. I wanted to see what would happen if that spirit was given room to run free. The simple honesty of his words touched Daphne deeply. Thank you, she said softly, not just for the job, but for seeing me when others looked away. Adam's eyes held hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary before returning to the road. We all deserve to be seen, Miss Calloway. The rest of the journey passed in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rolled toward the Fletcher ranch and home. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Under Daphne's care, the main house was gradually transformed. Room by room, she scrubbed, polished, repaired, and arranged until the neglected building began to reveal its former elegance. Adam had given her free rein with the household budget, and she spent it judiciously, replacing only what couldn't be salvaged and finding creative ways to breathe new life into worn furnishings. Meanwhile, Adam and Henry, along with 2 new ranch hands they'd hired, focused on the outbuildings and fencing. The sound of hammering and sawing became a constant backdrop to Daphne's days, punctuated by the occasional arrival of supply wagons or livestock deliveries. The promised housekeeper, Mrs. Rivera, arrived from San Antonio, a cheerful, plump woman in her 60s who immediately took Daphne under her wing. Together, they established routines for the growing household, dividing the cooking, cleaning, and laundry duties between them. You have a gift, Nina, Mrs. Rivera told Daphne one afternoon as they worked side by side kneading bread dough. You see what a home needs to feel like a home, not just look like one. Daphne smiled at the compliment. It was true that she took particular satisfaction in the small touches that transformed mere rooms into living spaces: fresh flowers on the dining table, carefully arranged books in the study, a colorful quilt draped over a chair. The ranch itself was coming alive around them. Adam had acquired a small herd of cattle, a dozen horses, and various barnyard animals that now populated the once empty pastures and pens. The rhythms of ranch life became familiar to Daphne, the pre-dawn stirrings as the men rose to begin their day, the midday meal that brought everyone to the kitchen, the evening gatherings around the table where the day's accomplishments and challenges were discussed. Through it all, Daphne's relationship with Adam evolved in subtle ways. The formal Mr. Morrison and Miss Calloway gradually gave way to Adam and Daphne when they were alone or with the household staff. Their conversations lengthened, extending beyond the practical matters of running the ranch to personal histories, opinions, and occasional debates. Daphne learned that Adam was 31, the third of 5 brothers, educated at a boarding school in Boston before returning west to work the family ranch. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged when he was relaxed, a passion for literature that explained the crates of books that had arrived from Colorado, and an unwavering sense of justice that showed in his treatment of everyone from ranch hands to town merchants. For his part, Adam seemed genuinely interested in Daphne's thoughts and experiences. He listened attentively when she spoke of her childhood in Taylor, her father's store, her mother's love of music. He asked questions that showed he valued her perspective, whether they were discussing the arrangement of furniture in the parlor or the merits of different cattle breeds. On Sundays, they rode to town together for church services. The first time they appeared publicly after the confrontation with Mrs. Hargrove, Daphne had been nervous, expecting whispers and sidelong glances. But to her surprise, many townspeople went out of their way to greet her warmly and express pleasure at seeing her again. "People have longer memories than you might think," Adam commented as they drove home after one such Sunday. "They remember your parents and the kind of people they were, and they've seen how the Hargroves treated you." "I never realized," Daphne admitted. "I thought everyone believed Mrs. Hargrove's version of events." "Small towns can be judgmental," Adam said, "but they can also recognize injustice when it's right before their eyes." The Hargroves themselves maintained a frigid distance, crossing the street when they saw Daphne coming or leaving establishments when she entered. It was a relief not to have direct confrontations, though Daphne occasionally felt Mrs. Hargrove's venomous gaze following her around town. As summer deepened into fall, the work at the ranch began to show significant results. The main house gleamed with fresh paint and polished floors, the barn stood solid and weatherproof, and the corrals contained healthy livestock. New ranch hands had been hired, bringing the total to 6 men who lived in the renovated bunkhouse. Mrs. Rivera had moved into one of the small cabins, which had been repaired and furnished comfortably. Only Daphne remained in the main house, occupying the blue room that had become truly hers with the addition of personal touches: a rag rug she'd made herself, curtains she'd sewn from pretty fabric, and a small bookshelf Adam had built for her growing collection of books borrowed from his library. Their evenings often found them in the parlor after dinner, Adam reading in his armchair while Daphne worked on mending or handcrafts. Sometimes they read aloud to each other, taking turns with chapters from Dickens or Austen, or one of the Western adventure novels Adam favored. It was during one such evening in late September that Daphne realized something had changed between them, or perhaps it had been changing so gradually that she'd failed to notice until that moment. Adam had been reading from The Last of the Mohicans, his deep voice bringing the adventure to life. When he paused to turn a page, Daphne glanced up from her embroidery and found him watching her, the book momentarily forgotten in his hands. There was something in his expression, a warmth, an intensity that made her breath catch. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the room. Then Adam cleared his throat and returned to the book, continuing the story as if nothing had happened. But something had happened, Daphne was certain of it. And in the days that followed, she became aware of other moments: his hand lingering when he helped her down from the wagon, his eyes finding hers across the dinner table, the way he seemed to orbit around her in any room they shared, never too close but always aware of her presence. She found herself equally aware of him: the breadth of his shoulders when he removed his jacket in the evenings, the grace with which he moved despite his size, the way sunlight caught the hints of auburn in his dark hair. She noticed how the ranch hands respected him without fear, how gently he handled the new foal born in the stables, how patient he was with the young boy who delivered mail from town. These observations confused her. Adam was her employer, her protector, perhaps her friend, but these new feelings suggested something more, something both thrilling and frightening in its implications. One crisp October morning, Daphne was in the garden harvesting the last of the summer vegetables when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Sheriff Wilson riding toward the house. Her first instinct was alarm: had Mrs. Hargrove made new accusations? But she forced herself to remain calm as she wiped her hands on her apron and went to greet him. "Good morning, Sheriff," she called as he dismounted. "What brings you out this way?" Sheriff Wilson removed his hat, looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Miss Calloway. Is Mr. Morrison about?" I need to speak with him on a matter of some importance. He's checking the north pasture with Henry. They should be back soon." She gestured toward the house. "Would you like to wait on the porch? I can bring you some coffee." The sheriff nodded gratefully, and Daphne led him to the porch swing, returning moments later with a tray bearing coffee and fresh corn muffins. As he ate and drank, Sheriff Wilson made polite conversation about the improvements to the ranch and the changing weather, but Daphne could sense an underlying tension in his manner. When Adam and Henry rode into the yard 20 minutes later, the sheriff straightened, setting aside his empty cup. Daphne moved to leave them to their business, but Adam gestured for her to stay as he greeted the lawman. "Sheriff Wilson, what can I do for you?" The sheriff cleared his throat. "I'm afraid I'm here on an unpleasant errand, Morrison. There's been a complaint filed against you and Miss Calloway." Daphne's heart sank, but Adam's expression remained impassive. "What kind of complaint?" "Mrs. Hargrove is claiming impropriety. Says it ain't proper for a single woman to be living in a house with an unmarried man, even with Mrs. Rivera as chaperone." The sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable. "She's stirring up talk in town, suggesting Miss Calloway's reputation is compromised." Daphne felt her face flame with embarrassment and indignation. "That's ridiculous. Mrs. Rivera lives on the property, and Adam and I are never alone in inappropriate circumstances." "I know that, and most folks with sense know it too," the sheriff said. "But Mrs. Hargrove is persistent. She's been bending the ear of Reverend Patterson and some of the church ladies." Adam's jaw tightened. "I see. And what exactly is she hoping to accomplish with these rumors?" Sheriff Wilson shrugged. "Hard to say for certain, but from what I gather, she's suggesting that either Miss Calloway return to her family or—" He hesitated. "Or what?" Adam prompted. "Or that your relationship be legitimized through marriage." The sheriff looked even more uncomfortable. "I know it ain't my business, but I thought you should be aware of the talk before your next trip to town." Adam was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you for the warning, Sheriff. We appreciate your discretion." "Well, that's all I came to say." Sheriff Wilson stood, replacing his hat. "For what it's worth, most folks think highly of how you two have restored this place. Don't let Martha Hargrove's spite trouble you too much." After seeing the sheriff off, Adam and Daphne remained on the porch, neither speaking. The implications of Mrs. Hargrove's accusations hung heavily between them. Finally, Daphne broke the silence. "I'm so sorry, Adam. She's doing this to punish me, and now she's dragging your reputation into it as well." Adam turned to her, his expression gentle. "You have nothing to apologize for, Daphne. Mrs. Hargrove's actions speak to her character, not yours. But what will we do? I don't want to cause scandal for you or damage the ranch's standing in the community." Adam was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant hills. "There are several options. Mrs. Rivera could move into the main house as a more visible chaperone. You could take one of the cabins instead of your room upstairs. Or—" He hesitated. "Or—" Daphne prompted. Adam met her gaze directly. "Or we could remove the cause for gossip entirely by making the arrangement they're speculating about a reality." Daphne's breath caught. "You mean—" "Marriage," Adam said simply. "It would silence the rumors and protect your reputation." Something cold settled in Daphne's chest at his practical tone. "I see. A marriage of convenience." Adam studied her face. "Is that what you think I'm proposing? A business arrangement, isn't it?" Daphne asked, suddenly unable to read the expression in his blue eyes. "A solution to a problem." Adam took a step closer, close enough that Daphne had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Daphne, I've watched you transform this house into a home. I've seen your strength, your kindness, your determination. I've come to admire and respect you more than any woman I've ever known." He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. "I won't pretend this situation hasn't forced the issue sooner than I might have chosen, but I can tell you with complete honesty that my feelings for you go far beyond respect or friendship." Daphne's heart hammered in her chest. "Adam, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "Take time to consider. This should be your choice freely made, not another situation where circumstances force your hand." He squeezed her fingers lightly before releasing them. "I'll arrange for Mrs. Rivera to move into the main house temporarily to quiet the immediate gossip. The rest can wait until you're ready." With that, he turned and walked toward the barn, leaving Daphne standing on the porch, her thoughts in turmoil. That evening dinner was a quiet affair. Mrs. Rivera, who had been informed of the situation, kept up a steady stream of cheerful conversation, seemingly oblivious to the tension between Adam and Daphne. After the meal, Adam excused himself to work on ranch accounts in his study, while Daphne helped Mrs. Rivera settle into one of the guest rooms downstairs. Later, alone in her room, Daphne sat by the window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Marriage. The word itself carried such weight, such permanence. After years of servitude in the Hargrove household, the idea of binding herself to another person, even someone as honorable as Adam, filled her with a complicated mix of emotions. Yet when she imagined leaving the ranch, returning to town to seek employment elsewhere, her heart ached. This place had become home in a way the Hargrove house never had. And Adam had become essential to her happiness in ways she was only beginning to understand. Was that love? This quiet certainty that being near him made her world brighter, that his respect meant more to her than anyone else's approval, that she looked forward to their evening conversations more than any other part of her day. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind circling the same questions without resolution. By dawn, she was no closer to an answer, but she knew one thing with certainty: she needed more time. Adam respected her request for space, maintaining a polite distance in the days that followed. They still shared meals and discussed ranch business, but the easy intimacy of their previous interactions was temporarily suspended, replaced by a careful courtesy that was almost more painful than outright tension would have been. Mrs. Rivera, bless her observant heart, made herself useful while giving them as much privacy as propriety allowed. She took over many of Daphne's kitchen duties, freeing her to work in the garden or sewing room places where she could think undisturbed. A week after Sheriff Wilson's visit, Daphne rode into town with Henry to collect mail and supplies. She was examining fabric at the general store when a familiar voice spoke behind her. Well, if it isn't the ranch hand's fancy woman. Daphne turned to find Beatrice Hargrove watching her with malicious amusement. Her stepsister was expensively dressed as always, though her face looked harder than Daphne remembered, with lines of discontent around her mouth. "Good morning, Beatrice," Daphne replied evenly. "I hope you're well." Beatrice gave a theatrical laugh. "Oh, I'm very well, but I hear you're causing quite the scandal out at the Fletcher place. Mother says it's only a matter of time before your cowboy gets tired of you and throws you out." Daphne calmly returned the fabric bolt to its shelf. "Your mother seems unusually concerned with my welfare, considering how eager she was to be rid of me." "She's concerned with decency," Beatrice snapped. "Something you clearly know nothing about, living in sin with that man." "I am a paid employee with a respectable position," Daphne said firmly. "And Mrs. Rivera lives in the house as well, as you well know. There is nothing improper about my situation." Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "That's not what Reverend Patterson's wife thinks. She was quite shocked when Mother explained the arrangements at the ranch." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Did you really think you could escape us, Daphne? That you could just walk away and find happiness? Mother won't allow it. One way or another, she'll see you ruined." Something shifted in Daphne at those words, not fear, as Beatrice clearly intended, but a sudden clarity. For 8 years, the Hargroves had controlled her through isolation and intimidation. They had taken her home, her inheritance, her freedom. But they could not take her future unless she allowed it. "Your mother has no power over me anymore," Daphne said quietly. "Neither do you. I've built a new life, one where I'm valued and respected." "As a servant," Beatrice sneered. "As a person," Daphne corrected. "Something you and your mother never understood." She gathered her purchases. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have errands to complete." As she turned to leave, Beatrice called after her, "He'll never marry you, you know. Men like Morrison don't wed their housekeepers." Daphne paused at the door, looking back at her stepsister with something close to pity. "The difference between us, Beatrice, is that I don't measure my worth by whether a man wants to marry me. I know my value with or without a wedding ring." With that, she walked out into the sunlight, her step lighter than it had been in days. The encounter with Beatrice, rather than upsetting her, had crystallized her thoughts. The Hargroves would never stop trying to control her, to diminish her happiness, unless she definitively closed that chapter of her life. And suddenly, Daphne knew exactly what she wanted to do. She found Henry loading supplies into their wagon and asked if he could wait a bit longer. There was one more errand she needed to complete. With his easy agreement, she headed toward the small law office at the end of the street. An hour later, Daphne emerged with a sense of purpose and resolution. The ride back to the ranch passed quickly, her mind busy with plans and possibilities. When they arrived, she helped Henry unload the supplies, then sought out Adam, finding him in the stable examining a horse's injured leg. "Adam," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her stomach. "May I speak with you privately when you have a moment?" He straightened, searching her face. "Of course. Give me 10 minutes to finish here." Daphne nodded and returned to the house, where she washed up and changed from her town clothes into a simple blue dress. One Adam had once commented brought out the color of her eyes. When he joined her in the parlor, he had similarly washed and changed, his damp hair combed back from his forehead, making him look younger than usual. "You wanted to speak with me," he said, remaining standing near the door. Daphne took a deep breath. "Yes. I encountered Beatrice Hargrove in town today." Adam frowned. "Did she upset you?" She tried, Daphne admitted, but instead she clarified things for me. She moved closer to him. "Adam, the Hargroves will never stop trying to control my life, to punish me for daring to seek happiness. As long as there's any vulnerability in my situation, they'll exploit it." "I won't let them hurt you," Adam said firmly. "I know," Daphne smiled, "but I don't want to live in fear of them, always wondering when they'll next try to interfere." She hesitated, then continued. "I went to see Mr. Grayson, the lawyer, today. I've filed a formal complaint about the disappearance of my father's will and the misappropriation of what should have been my inheritance." Adam's eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's a bold move." "It's long overdue," Daphne replied. "Mr. Grayson believes we have a case, especially since several witnesses have come forward confirming that my father told them about his will and its contents." "I'm proud of you," Adam said softly, "standing up for yourself this way. That's not all." Daphne took another step toward him. "Mr. Grayson also explained that, as a married woman, my legal position would be much stronger. My husband could represent my interests in court, and the Hargroves would have no claim of any kind on me." Adam went very still. "Daphne, I know you offered marriage partly to protect me from gossip," she continued quickly. "And I appreciate that. But I need you to know that if I accept, it won't be out of necessity or gratitude." She gathered her courage. "It will be because I've come to care for you deeply. Because I can't imagine my life without you in it." The stillness in Adam broke. In 2 strides he crossed the distance between them, his hands coming up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. "Daphne Calloway," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I offered marriage because I love you. Not out of duty or propriety, but because the thought of spending my life with you brings me more joy than I ever thought possible." His thumbs stroked her cheek softly. "I've been half in love with you since I first saw you in that kitchen doorway, and falling deeper every day since." Tears pricked at Daphne's eyes, but they were tears of happiness. "Then ask me properly, Adam Morrison. Ask me the question you avoided before." A smile broke across his face, transforming it with a brightness she rarely saw. Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands in his. "Daphne Calloway, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not for convenience or protection, but because I love you with all my heart and want to build a life with you on this land that we've both come to love." Through her tears, Daphne smiled down at him. "Yes, Adam. Yes, I will marry you." He rose and drew her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gently but quickly deepened with the release of long, restrained emotion. Daphne wound her arms around his neck, returning his kiss with all the love and longing that had been growing in her heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "How soon can I make you my wife?" Daphne laughed softly. "Well, we need to publish bans for 3 Sundays, but if we start this week—" "3 weeks," Adam groaned. "That's an eternity." "After 8 years with the Hargroves and 6 months of knowing you," Daphne said, stroking his cheek, "3 weeks seems quite manageable." Their wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the small white church in Taylor. The entire town seemed to turn out for the occasion, filling the pews and spilling out onto the church steps. Mrs. Rivera had sewn Daphne a beautiful wedding dress from ivory silk, with Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, contributing her own wedding veil as something borrowed. Henry stood as Adam's best man, while Mrs. Rivera, who had become like family to Daphne, served as her matron of honor. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Reverend Patterson speaking movingly about love born from respect and kindness. The Hargroves were conspicuously absent. 2 days before the wedding, Sheriff Wilson had arrived at the ranch with unexpected news. Mrs. Hargrove and her daughters had abruptly left town, reportedly bound for San Antonio. Rumors suggested that Mr. Grayson's investigation into the missing will had uncovered evidence of fraud that might lead to criminal charges. "Seems they decided a strategic retreat was in order," the sheriff had explained, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "The store's been sold, and the house is to be auctioned. Mr. Grayson says that when the legal matters are settled, you might have a claim to the proceeds, Miss Calloway." The news had lifted a weight from Daphne's shoulders. Justice might come at last for her father's memory, but more importantly, the shadow of the Hargroves had been removed from her future. Now, standing before the altar with Adam's strong hands holding hers, Daphne felt only joy and anticipation. As they exchanged vows, his blue eyes never left hers, filled with a love so clear and steady it took her breath away. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Patterson declared. "Mr. Morrison, you may kiss your bride." Adam drew her into his arms with a tenderness that brought tears to Daphne's eyes. His lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their promises to each other, a kiss that spoke of coming home, of finding shelter after a long storm, of beginning a journey together. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and decorated with autumn flowers and ribbons. The entire community joined in the festivities, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the county. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they had worked so hard to restore, Adam pulled Daphne away from the celebration for a moment of privacy on the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Morrison?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. Daphne leaned back against his chest, watching their friends and neighbors laughing and dancing in the yard. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "It feels like a dream." Adam pressed a kiss to her temple. "Not a dream. This is real, Daphne. This home, this life we're building, it's ours, and no one can take it away." She turned in his arms to face him. "When I first came here, I thought I was just escaping the Hargroves. I never imagined I'd find everything. A real home, work that matters, love. When I bought this ranch, I thought I was just looking for land to call my own," Adam replied. "I never expected to find the woman who would make it truly feel like home." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You've given this place life, Daphne. You've given me life." The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their moment. Henry appeared around the corner of the porch, stopping short when he saw them. "Oh, sorry to intrude, boss madam, but the folks are asking for the bride and groom for the first dance." "Tell them we'll be right there," Adam said, his eyes never leaving Daphne's face. When Henry had gone, Adam stole one more kiss before offering Daphne his arm. "Shall we, Mrs. Morrison? We have a lifetime of dances ahead, but this is our first." Together, they returned to their wedding celebration, stepping into the cleared space in the yard as the musicians struck up a waltz. Adam's hand settled at Daphne's waist, guiding her confidently through the steps as their guests watched and applauded. "I never knew you could dance so well," Daphne murmured, following his lead effortlessly. Adam smiled down at her. "My mother insisted all her sons learn, said we'd thank her someday." His smile softened. "She was right, as mothers usually are." "I wish I could have met her," Daphne said. "You will. I've written to my family about our marriage. They're planning to visit in the spring." His expression grew serious. "They'll love you, Daphne, just as I do." As the music swelled around them, other couples joined the dance. But Daphne was aware only of Adam, the strength of his arms, the warmth in his eyes, the future stretching before them like the vast Texas sky. From slave in her own home to beloved wife and mistress of a prospering ranch, her journey had been one of pain and loss, but also of courage and unexpected joy. And as Adam drew her closer, whispering promises meant for her ears alone, Daphne knew that whatever challenges life might still hold, they would face them together as family. 5 years later, the Fletcher Ranch, now known throughout the county as the Morrison Place, was thriving. The once neglected property had been fully restored and expanded, with lush pastures supporting healthy herds of cattle and horses. The main house gleamed with care, its rooms filled with the warmth of family life and the laughter of children. On a sunny spring afternoon, Daphne sat on the porch swing, her 3-year-old son Jacob nestled against her side as she read him a story. At her feet, baby Elizabeth slept peacefully in her cradle, her tiny hands curled into fists beside her rosebud mouth. The sound of approaching riders made Jacob squirm free from his mother's embrace, his face lighting up with excitement. "Papa!" he cried, spotting Adam at the head of the small procession returning from the south pasture. "Careful on the steps," Daphne called as her son raced down to greet his father. She watched with a full heart as Adam swung down from his horse and scooped Jacob into his arms, tossing him high in the air to the boy's delighted squeals. The years had been kind to them both. Adam's face showed new laugh lines primarily. etched beside his eyes and mouth, and a few strands of silver had appeared at his temples. But his tall frame was as strong as ever, and his eyes still lit with the same love when they fell upon his family. Daphne knew that she, too, had changed. Motherhood and happiness had softened her, filled out the thinness of her youth. Her auburn hair now held a few strands of its own silver, but Adam claimed they only made her more beautiful to him. Setting Jacob on his shoulders, Adam approached the porch, his smile widening at the sight of Daphne and the baby. "How are my girls?" he called, climbing the steps to join them. "Missing you," Daphne replied with a smile, lifting her face for his kiss. "How was the calving?" "Successful," Adam reported, settling beside her on the swing with Jacob now on his lap. 20 new calves, all healthy. Henry's staying with them tonight just to be safe." He peered into the cradle at his sleeping daughter. "And how's our little princess?" "Just fed and sleeping soundly," Daphne said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "She has your stubborn determination refused to nap all morning, then finally surrendered about an hour ago." Adam chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against Daphne's ear. "That's my girl." Morrison determination. "Morrison stubbornness, more like," Daphne teased. "Papa, can I ride Thunder tomorrow?" Jacob interrupted, his small face serious as he named Adam's stallion a magnificent animal that was far too powerful for a 3-year-old. Adam tousled the boy's dark hair so like his own. "Not Thunder, son, but maybe we can take Daisy out together if you help me with the morning chores." Jacob considered this compromise, then nodded solemnly. "I'll help. I'm a good helper." "The best," Adam agreed, exchanging an amused glance with Daphne over their son's head. The familial moment was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Rivera, who had remained with them all these years, becoming something of a grandmother to the children. "Mail came while you were out, Mr. Morrison," she announced, handing Adam several envelopes. "And dinner will be ready in an hour. Jacob, come help me set the table, yes." Jacob slid from his father's lap, always eager to assist the cook who sneaked him extra cookies when his parents weren't looking. "Coming, Nana Rosa." As they disappeared into the house, Adam sorted through the mail. "Letter from my brothers in Colorado," he noted, "and one from Mr. Grayson." He handed the latter to Daphne. "Probably news about the final settlement." Daphne opened the lawyer's letter, scanning its contents. "Yes, he says the court has made its final ruling. The proceeds from the Hargrove house sale will be transferred to our account at the bank." She lowered the letter to her lap. After all this time, it's finally over. The legal battle over her father's estate had been lengthy and complex, made more so by Mrs. Hargrove's disappearance to parts unknown. But persistence and truth had prevailed, with the courts ultimately ruling that Jacob Calloway's property had been wrongfully appropriated after his death. "Justice at last," Adam said quietly, taking her hand. "Though I'd say you've built something far more valuable than anything they took from you." Daphne smiled, looking around at the thriving ranch, the beautiful home, and the cradle containing their sleeping daughter. "We've built it together," she corrected. "Everything that matters." Adam brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't come to the Hargrove house that day, if we'd never met?" Daphne considered the question. "I like to think our paths would have crossed eventually. That some things are meant to be, no matter what obstacles stand in their way." "A romantic notion," Adam teased gently, "but I share it. From the moment I saw you in that doorway, something in me recognized something in you, like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing." "Even though I was a half-starved servant girl with bruised hands and a threadbare dress?" Daphne asked, only half joking. Adam's expression grew serious. "I saw your spirit first, Daphne. The way you stood straight despite everything they'd done to break you, the dignity they couldn't take away." He cupped her cheek in his hand. "I fell in love with your courage long before I noticed how beautiful you are." Even after 5 years of marriage, his words could still make her heart flutter. Daphne leaned into his touch. "And I fell in love with your kindness, the way you saw me when everyone else looked past me." A soft cry from the cradle interrupted their moment. Baby Elizabeth was stirring, tiny fists waving as she woke from her nap. Daphne moved to lift her, but Adam was faster, gathering his daughter into his arms with practiced ease. "Hello, little one," he murmured, cradling her against his broad chest. "Did you have sweet dreams?" Watching her husband with their daughter, his large hands so gentle, his expression so tender, Daphne was struck anew by the miracle of their family. From the ashes of loss and cruelty, they had built this life of love and purpose. Not without struggles or sorrows. Life on a Texas ranch was never easy, but with a foundation of mutual respect and affection that weathered every storm. As if sensing her thoughts, Adam looked up, meeting her gaze over their daughter's downy head. "Happy, Mrs. Morrison?" he asked, echoing the question he'd first asked on their wedding day. Daphne's smile was answer enough, but she spoke the words anyway, filling them with the fullness of her heart. "Completely, Mr. Morrison, completely." And in that moment, with the Texas sun gilding the land they'd restored together and their children safe in their care, Daphne knew that the long journey from prisoner to beloved had been worth every step. She had found not just escape, but a true home where she was valued, respected, and cherished, not as a servant but as family.